Most misunderstandings in the world could be avoided if people would simply take the time to ask, what else could this mean? Shannon L. Older.
Albert grunted. Do you know what happens to lads who ask too many questions? Mort thought for a moment. No, he eventually said. What? There was silence. Then Albert straightened up and he said, damned if I know. They probably get their answers and serves them right. Terry Pratchett.
I love that one. The wise man does not give the right answers. He poses the right questions. Claude Levi-Strauss.
Part of being successful is about asking questions and listening to the answers. Anne Burrell.
Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. Voltaire. I am Karen.
And I am Nuala. And we are the Safety Collaborators.
Our mission is to help people have better conversations and change the way they think about safety. Consider us your thinking partners, sharing expertise and wisdom in everything safety, safety culture, and psychological safety.
You may have picked up the theme that today is all about questions and questioning. Questioning is an art, a skill. And like all skills, it takes practice, it takes reflection, it takes getting it wrong and not getting the answers we were looking for, and reworking the process to improve. Karen and I are going to explore this art today and see where the questions that we've considered and pondered take the conversation. So what is a question? The Oxford Dictionary describes the meaning of a question as a sentence, phrase, or word that asks for information. And questions are interesting things because depending on the question, we get different responses, verbally, physically, and emotionally. And when we're looking at safety, we're not just looking at one aspect, we're looking at emotional, we're looking at physical, and we're looking at psychological safety. So, Kaz, I'm going to pose a question to you. What emotions can different questions stir up?
Oh my goodness. How long have we got?
This is true. As long as we need.
I think another thing to add to that is how a question is asked is also really important.
Mm-hmm.
When we did some of this research, and from our own experience, some interesting words came up when we thought about the meaning of questions. And we can probably relate to some or many of these at different stages in our life, you know, when we get asked a question. So it could be, when do we get asked that question? You know, is it because it's for an investigation of some sort? And I'm not necessarily talking safety. It could be some other thing in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be interrogation or interrogative sentence. That might be an investigation of some sort. Or we can have, you know, we're just asking or inquiring or querying something. Questions can be direct or indirect. They can be a yes type of question or a no type of question. They can force us to critical thinking. We might be asking questions that encourage us to be curious. And of course, we can have many leading questions. And why aren't you using the ladder over there?
Exactly.
We explore a lot of question styles. And in our episode 42, we looked at the conversational intelligence and some of the neuroscience that goes behind our words, if you like. Depending on the type of words we use, sometimes they can trigger us, where we get big shots of cortisol and we may react in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
or they may trigger us in a different way that makes us have big shots of oxytocin, which causes us to feel a different way. So questions can be very responsible for how we show up on any day.
Mm-hmm. And where we're at in the moment.
I was just thinking, you know, you might have got up and you've gone to the office or to the job site or whatever, and you're feeling pretty good, and someone asks you a question like, so why didn't you get that done yesterday?
And everything just deflates.
You'll notice tone of voice.
Yeah.
And now my day just turned to shit.
If you allow it to.
Of course, that's the next thing, which I think leads nicely into, so why do people stop asking questions, Nuala?
You know, whenever I'm asked this, it always takes me back to one of my friends who was in the army. And it was their first kind of debriefing. They were going on, I think it was in basic training still, actually. And the sergeant asked at the end of the briefing of what they were doing, any questions? and it was all in Afrikaans. So my friend put his hand up and the sergeant said, "Ja." And he went, asked his question, and the sergeant went, "Kak vra, sit. Enige ander vra?" Nobody got up. Nobody put their hand up.
And in English, that means, shit question, sit down. Any other questions? How many times have we felt that in some shape or form?
Exactly. And sometimes it's not that direct, but it's the tone or the facial expression.
Indeed.
And a good friend of mine, she must have been in her first or second job. So she's in her early 20s, and she was working for a foreign national living in South Africa, and there was a language barrier, accent, all that kind of stuff. And she just couldn't understand what this man wanted. And she kept going back to him and saying, "Could you tell me again? Could you tell me again? Sorry, could you tell me again?" And eventually he looked at her and he said, "3 times! You've asked me 3 times! Are you stupid?" And you think of the multinational and multicultural environments that many of us work in, then you just shut down and you go, well, is it all about me? And I'm so grateful for the conversations we have to be able to get to explore that we so often in the weekly safety meetings on board, we'll have those pictures of people, looking like they've been asked a question and just going, nodding their head and going, thumbs up, and walking away and going, I have no idea what they just said.
No idea.
Or the other one.
Tannoids.
Tannoids are my worst.
Oh, my God.
My worst. I don't understand them 90% of the time.
And that doesn't matter whether it's on board a rig or at an airport, by the way.
Absolutely. Anywhere. Or you think of humour, you'll tell a joke and everyone will look at you and not laugh, and you're like, it sounds really funny in my own language.
So true, so true.
I've gone down a rabbit hole, so why else? Yes,
we've gone down that, but it's important, right? So don't ask questions when you don't think people understand you.
So why else? I mean, embarrassment. I feel like I should know this. No one else is putting their hand up to ask the question, so clearly I'm the only one who doesn't know it. The reality is that most people in the room are sitting with the same burning question, waiting for someone brave enough to actually speak up and say, can I ask a bit more about this, or what is happening here?
I've been one of those people.
Oh, we all have, I think, if we're honest.
School experiences, I was that kid terrified to put up my hand and ask a question. I was terrified that I didn't know. Back then, I didn't understand that asking a question is what helps me to know.
Yeah, it's part of the learning process.
It took me many, many years to understand that it's okay to ask a question, regardless of the response, actually. That took years of overcoming shyness and becoming braver in many ways.
And there are some cultural kind of environments in schools, and I've had this conversation with people around the world. One person said to me, he said what he found so devastating about their schooling system in their country is that it's become such a thing to not ask questions, that people will rather go home and use Google to try and find out the answers. But everyone will pretend they know. And devastatingly, that then comes into the working environment, because that learned behavior goes into work where you go, I'm not going to put my hand up and ask. I'm going to just say yes. Yes, absolutely. I've got this. And I'm going to go and then try and freaking find Google or some other way of learning, or I'm going to make a mistake. And worst case scenario, I'm going to get hurt or hurt someone.
Absolutely. I think we see this play out in all forums these days. Strangely enough, it should be getting easier to feel freer to ask a question, and yet somehow I'm not sure that it is. Because asking questions is the height of vulnerability.
Yep.
In many ways.
It's a height of vulnerability, and I'm going to say something probably quite controversial here, but there's become a thing where everything has to be accepted, where everything has to, you're stepping on eggshells a lot in our working environments. Oh, you can't ask that, or you can't question that, or think that, or say that, because, someone might take it the wrong way, someone might be offended. And it's feeding this inability to speak up.
Couldn't agree more. And I'm with you on the controversy on this one.
And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do think that it affects trust in our working environments.
Absolutely. Trust is such a key part to all of this. It plays a very important role. If we don't trust the environment, and I'm thinking of psychological safety now as well, what are we talking about when we talk about psychological safety? We're talking about the ability, one of the key factors of psychological safety is feeling safe enough to speak up, to ask questions, to not be marginalised or to feel punished. And the current environment makes that really difficult. And this is a slight diversion here, but at the same time, we're looking at ways of improving our diversity, inclusion, etc., etc., etc. Well, psychological safety and trust underpins all of that.
It does.
So if we don't feel safe to ask a question, we've got a long way to go with everything else.
Miles to go.
And I think there's something else here. Why do we feel difficult to answer questions as well? And I think this touches pretty much on what we've just been talking about. It's that fear that if I respond to a question or if I answer a question, and I'm going to use social media as a classic place.
Oh boy, here we go. Yep.
Right. I mean, you think about it. People put something up on a post. And I know myself, there are things that I see and I think, if I respond to this, if I answer this, I'm going to get drowned in a world I don't want to be in.
It's going to be a diatribe of whether it's
nonsense,
attack, nonsense,
mostly,
whatever the case is. And you're right, because I read something yesterday and I went, actually, I'm going to choose not to engage in this because these are people I don't know. And I'm just like, I have an opinion.
Yeah.
I'll happily keep it to myself at this point.
Yeah.
It becomes a problem, though, in our working environments when I have an opinion.
Exactly.
And I don't feel that I can contribute to the conversation because I would rather keep it to myself.
Yes.
And sometimes that's because I haven't been given the time to think, to be able to actually formulate my answer. And by the time I've got to formulating what I would like to say or answer, people have moved on.
Everything else has moved on. Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, missed that point.
Yeah, indeed. And I think a key point is we're not sure how to give feedback or how to respond to things sometimes, depending on what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, not every question requires feedback. I think we should say that. Sometimes it is, and there's many different types of questions. So depending on the style of the question, depending on the context. And I think as leaders, what's really important, so for the leaders out there, a key to all of this is listening, most definitely.
And not putting people on the spot. It was one of the things that I learned hugely as a facilitator when I first started facilitating.
Yeah, no, you're right.
You ask a question and then go, Karen, what do you think? Karen is a deer in the headlights feeling like she's been pounced on by a leopard.
Constantly. Yeah.
You go into freeze. There are very few people who can just pop off an answer off the top of their head. So it's the asking the question, the listening, and creating a space where people feel they don't have to just pop off straight off their head. They can actually process and then go, okay, yes, this is what I think, or what have you.
Part of the concern around all of this is that we're not really taught in schools, and I will go right back, or certainly not in my area, we weren't taught how to have a conversation. What are the constructs of language? And I don't mean grammar, I mean the actual construct of language, the act of speaking, and different acts can solicit different responses. But unless we all understand that, it's very difficult. So as we were going through this, we decided our next episode will actually be something called the linguistic act. And we're going to take you through a little bit of a journey on what are the different types of linguistic acts, the conversations, the questions, the situations that you're in, and what do they mean? Because depending on that depends on how we respond. So watch out for that one, or listen out, whichever.
And I'm looking forward to that one because I know I'm going to learn a whole lot more because it's not something I've dived into. So woohoo!
It'll be a fun one.
Conversations that matter are where we're at. So let us know what you want to chat about. Mail us at hello@safetycollaborations.com and we'll get back to you. Okay, now on with the show.
What does this mean for us as leaders?
Well, we need to get comfortable in asking questions and comfortable in listening to the answers without judging, without listening to what's going on in our heads, so listening to our own listening without listening to respond. And we've done so many different episodes that bring up listening. And there will be a list of other episodes that you can link into all of this around questioning and feedback in the show notes. And also as a leader, to be comfortable to know that if you don't ask, you don't know what others know or don't know. You don't know where others are at. But also, if you don't ask,
Critical.
you don't know yourself, whether that's getting more information or then being able to expand the conversation in your team.
Such a critical leadership skill. And more so, the more VUCA our world is, which is volatile, uncertain, changing, etc., the more important this process is.
I remember years ago when we were in the office together and you asked someone a question and I was doing a typical Nula, immediately answering it for them. And you gave me this look of, could you let someone else speak? And afterwards I said, well, why did you even ask the question? Of course they know that. And you went, whoa, hold off on your assumptions there. How do you know they know? It was very purposeful, the question you were asking. And it wasn't to find out if I knew. It was to find out what the other people in the room knew. So by me jumping in there, it was like, okay, well, now you've just lost my opportunity to find out what other people know. And it was an amazing lesson.
What a memory.
But it was a really good learning experience for me as a facilitator, as a coach, as a leader. Because by me thinking I'm making it easy by answering the question for the people around me, I was taking away their learning experience and opportunity. And I've taken that into my coaching work. I've taken it into my facilitation work by asking the supposed obvious questions. And it's amazing what a different conversation that elicits.
You've just triggered a whole bunch of memories. I actually think I've stopped doing that to some degree. Because I know I sometimes will ask questions that are meant to trigger, are meant to solicit thoughts and whatever. So, thank you for that memory.
And the other side of that is that we do need to create that environment. It's not about stepping on eggshells, but it's creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to respond.
Indeed. And that keeps bringing us back to that whole treat people as human beings for a start, and then let's give permission and respect to whoever's in the room, so to speak. I think those are two very important components. And that's what also builds psychological safety and trust in teams and in the room.
And goes back to that understanding that people are different. They're not trying to be difficult. So,
absolutely.
When we run sessions, whether it's onshore, offshore, online, you pose a question. So you have an asking question kind of session. And some people will dive in, others will skirt around the question. Some take what feels like forever to answer a relevant question. It's around how people process, and it's being comfortable with that. Not everyone processes at the same time. Some people, it's like bamboo. They just shoot. And other people are like oak trees. They take a very long time to germinate, and then suddenly you start seeing leaves blooming.
Such a lovely analogy. Let's just skip through these ones quite quickly. What we've got a list in front of us, in case you're wondering what we're skipping through. We're not skipping around the room. So what are the components of a good question?
Relevant to the topic or task.
Make it clear and easy to understand the language. And I'll add to that, remember, many people are processing in more than one language.
And that takes time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And be simple. Ask one question at a time. We might have 3 or 4 questions burning in our head. The problem, if we ask them straight after each other, the person only remembers the last question. And the first or the second may have been the most important.
To add to that, keep it short. Be as succinct as you can. Asking questions is not about showing off your knowledge. It's about soliciting a great response and getting the answers that you need. So keep it short and clear and succinct.
And our favourite one, allow time for people to think. Don't ask a question and then proceed to answer it. And that's so easy because you ask the question and then people look at you and there's like 5 seconds of silence. It feels like 10 hours. And then you go, righty, boom.
Yeah. Each situation is a little different, but certainly open questions that encourage thinking. So leading questions can be interpreted as manipulation, putting people on guard. But when we ask open questions, we are in a mindset of discovery. So this way, others feel this is inquisitive and curious. So we've got here the 5 W's and 1 H. In other words, think about the who, what, when, how, and why. A little word of caution, however. They are all great ways to open a question, but with a why question, be careful. use it with discretion, because a why question can be leading, critical, or a judgy question.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about tone of voice, if you add tone of voice to that, be careful of the why questions.
Very much so. And just on the opening questions, a closed question can be important. Sometimes we need a yes/no answer. But if you were looking to elicit a conversation and you ask a closed question and you get a yes/no answer, there's nothing wrong with following it up with an open question. Oh, that's interesting. Could you say more about that?
I've got to dive a little bit into a little bit of clean language stuff. And we use this techniques in coaching all the time. If you want to solicit more information and you feel that there's more to come, then just ask, and what else?
Yes.
It's one of my favourite questions.
And you can ask that many times.
And what else? Keep repeating until you're pretty sure that the other side has finished.
And of course, coming back to conversational intelligence, is ask questions for which you have no answers. And that brings in curiosity. So ask the questions you have no answers for, or even if you think you do know the answers, be curious. So it could be questions like, what insights do you want to share? What are your thoughts about this task? What would you change to make this more efficient and safe? And of course, what else could this mean?
And then ask, and what else?
Double clicking. We'll have to bring that in at some point.
It just reminded me of a 3-letter acronym that fits into here. TEDS.
Oh, yes.
So TEDS are, tell me more about that. Explain to me what you mean. I'm not sure I understand. And describe. So describe to me what was happening or what your thoughts are. So the TEDS are a lovely 3-letter acronym to help ask questions.
Fabulous.
That are a bit different to the how, what, when, why type questions.
Yeah.
So tell me a little more about that, explain some more, or describe to me. And this helps.
Oh, they are fabulous. They work so well. And remember, if you don't get the answer you were looking for, change the question. Stop repeating the same question, hoping that the person will give you a different answer. After all, the question is more powerful than the answer. And questions can be seeds that are planted. You may not always get the answer that you're seeking or the full answer when it's asked. As long as you've planted the seed and you are allowing space for people to sit and to think in the question for a while, they will eventually answer it even if you're not around.
So to wrap up this session, Nuala felt inspired by this topic of questions and giving people time and space to think, and she wrote a poem. So between us, Nuala likes to write poems. I actually love reading poems. So I am going to read the poem for you, written by Nuala Gage. It is called The Question. If you sit in the question long enough, the answer will find you. An epiphany, the light will dawn. Hold your question, especially when it is hard. Don't speed up the process. That is not what needs to be done. Let your thoughts flow. Feel the emotions. Hear your wiser self. Sit with the question. Where is it going? What answer do you seek? If you had no fear, where would your heart take you?
May this inspire you to get comfortable with questions that may not have answers, rather than answers that cannot be questioned.
Thank you for joining us today. As always, lovely to have a conversation that matters. And we think questioning is an important conversation. Connect with us on our website, safetycollaborations.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode and all links to relevant podcasts related to the topic and a few other little goodies. Leave us a message on the Vive chat. Ask us a question, actually.
Yes.
Please, ask us a question. We would love to get some questions from you. And always, if you enjoyed this podcast and you feel that others could get value from this, then please help us spread the word by following us on your favourite podcast platform and share it with others. Till next week, stay safe and stay well.